Chapter 1. When Duty Calls. Mustering Up. In Irish, Mar ui sinech fewarm and planed sinech nua, in English Major's Farm, Planet New China, April 17th, 2020. Major stood there looking at the image of Earth. He moved his hand in the air as he touched each hill and mountain that jutted out as craggy blips in his eyes as he looked down on what to him seemed an incredibly small seed to what had become his homeworld, a tiny seed of Ireland. He traced out the craggy southeast, the craggy northwest, stopping momentarily as his finger crossed down from the roughness into a smooth river valley of the Swilly, a rushing torrent of frothy waves down a dark brown pathway etched from the grey stones of Donegal. It was there that he reflected on his schoolboy readings of his ancestor, who, there in that green valley, first realised what was going to happen to the future, that it would just be Ireland, alone, a tiny seed on the earth that would have to grow a future on its own. He imagined his ancestor sitting there alone as usual, contemplating that realisation that he first penned in Letterkenny, that the best they could hope for, given the nightmare, was that of Ireland being a safe haven for forces of freedom, mainly refugee British forces of the island next door, which too appeared as a cognitively dissonant tiny seed next to a smaller seed, given what both had grown into, the place he was from, though similar of a different scale then, that of two nations on earth, but of two worlds in the universe era urnua. He wondered what emotions his ancestor had in realising that it would only be two seeds, with any chance at all. With one seed, the smaller, providing the necessary guidance and surety that the other seed would need, in as it had as much contamination, the word his ancestor used for the spreading mental pox around him, in the entire world, for the effects of losing mental freedom. Was he sad? Was he angry? He wanted to know. This moment in history was of personal interest to him. He wanted to know what he inherited from his ancestor that also shaped his own responses to events in life. He wanted to know how ch1 dealt with the realisation. Was he simply rational about it or emotional? The Major queried the knowledge base looking for the exact moment so he could go observe ch1 and see what exactly he was thinking when he penned the now famous Plan Avalon doctrine, Exodus from Earth. It was common for family members of the MacDoob clan that served in the military to measure themselves to ch1, even though he himself would never approve of such a thing, as he often encouraged his children to be their own persons. Yet it was what all the military MacDoobs did, whether they were honest about it with each other or not. As a junior officer, a field agent, Major wanted to know certain things about serving that he thought he could learn from ch1, though mindful that ch1 himself would point out the uniqueness of his service, that each person has their own unique conditions and missions to be dealt with through their own unique exigencies. Major was curious if he was on the right track in life, or if he was just living out his own schoolboy fantasy, spending so much time studying ch1's career like so many other MacDoob trying to measure up to the exaggerated tales and interpretations of history accounts and flashy documentaries. He had already come to terms with breaking down the myths about his ancestor with the reality of a lonely person, isolated from others by a cyber prison, yet it was that he was able to found a nation, a universal system. From that isolation, that intrigued him. Major wanted to know if he had it in him too. If that ever happened to him, could he measure up? Would he be smart and patient like a cunning hunter after a faster, larger prey? Or would he fail in such pursuits? The Major's youth shining through his self-concern, not yet proven in the field, confident in his own powers. Major went downstairs into his study to pick up his cap before transporting to the office at the Bureau of Historical Intelligence. It was the morning staff meeting all were required to attend as long as they were not in the field. He found the meetings insightful as he studied the older officers and their questions and demeanour. One had to be of the clan to work in historical intelligence, as one would not only be privy to the most private moments of Shosu Makdub, the shining hero of legend, but also of other important members of the ruling clan of the Gaels, the most powerful house in the universe, the Makdub clan. Major himself was not a Makdub in name, but a Uí Sinich, being one of the majority of biracial descendants, the actual pale white Irish Makdub being more of a rarity in the family clan than what would have been anticipated in Old Ireland, where there were nothing but pale white, dark, curly-haired, usually tall Makdubes, that through Shosu became an international and intertribal house. Major was happy about one thing though. He had the same eyes as Shosu, slanted Asian eyes, though the Major's irises were a more brownish hazel, than the green hazel of Shosu's slanted eyes, a rare genetic expression in his family of Native American eyes. He could trace his descent from Shosu of over 1,000 years through marriage and children. Major wondered if all the young officers in his division had the same yearning to be great, to be a hero. He wondered if he would be disappointed in his first-hand knowledge of Shosu. Would he still find him the historical legend, or just another punter, even though Shosu's legend was great in that he was a punter, lived his life as a punter, hiding reality from the oppression that had imprisoned him?
"You're going to be late if you keep staring at that,"
Baojai called out, in the Major's mind. One of the chief benefits of service was the artificial life form, ALF. Baojai, one formed a symbiotic life, with as an officer they were off limits to the civilian population, and as service was a rare occupation, it was rare to be a symbiotic life form. But the Major stopped staring at the stuffed animal in his study his grandmother had given him. It sat in an archival glass box, a small stuffed deer that Seosum would have his Alf Jamie give to his hidden children. It was the most prized treasure in his family, passed down from generation to generation over the centuries, its antlers a little worn down from his ancestors playing with it as a child before it became a prized relic. Yet it was ironic in that the deer's creation in linear time was just a mere 3 years ago, as Major was a member of the contemporaneous era, those who would live at the same time as Seosam Makdub on Earth, in parallel with Seosam but from different planets, yet descended from him some 50 generations later.
"Get going, you'll embarrass both of us if you're late."
Baozai remonstrated to Major. Major looked down at his wrist, while making sure he had a 1 metre space between himself and the desk. Turning his Clan Torque bracelet, a bright sphere, grew and engulfed him. The next moment he was in his cubicle in the Bureau of Historical Intelligence, which was located a quarter the way around the planet from his townland. Major searched through some folders on his desk in his cubby. He had kept handwritten notes on his field trip to San Francisco in 1995, one of the places he could go to do field work where his biracial features would not be out of time or place. He was trying to remember the Greyhound bus Seosam had arrived on, because he had to arrange for one of the other operatives to steal $50 money order from out of one of his religious books since he had received an order to do so. His first trip would be getting the bus schedule to pinpoint the route, since all operations had to be confirmed by boots on the ground, since memories could be faked and inserted during this age on Earth. One couldn't just trust the memory archives taken from Seosum during his living days, as a recipient of cyber attacks in his brain continuously. Neural data could be corrupted, invented, and also authentic. Major was itching to go. It was his first op after 3 years of training, where he was the lead designer of the operation and field commander. Pushing some papers into a folder, he put on his Siokana green beret. Walking calmly down the hallway, he stared at the grey marble floor as he passed each individual stone one by one, noticing how each was unique and glistened in the sunlight that was ported in, though they worked deep underground, as solar flares could happen any time, anywhere, although hardly ever, Irish don't like to work unnecessarily and rebuild something due to bad planning. As the hall careened down a gentle slope into a larger passageway, he could see other members of the Syocona milling about. He noticed how some resembled others, while others bore no family resemblance at all, albeit they were all Shosu's children, so to speak. All Irish, but physically might be 99% of a non-Irish gene pool, as after 50 generations some were members of national homeworlds, intermarrying among their people after the initial Irish coupling with Shosu from a native woman amongst their people, while others freely intermarried among the various nations. They all entered into a main hall. Approaching Major was a younger woman. She was visibly half pale and half dark, of what proportions of which it was hard to tell. Her brown hair with blonde highlights was thick and wavy, her tan skin shining in the sun like the grey granite with a coating of moisture. Freckles on her nose, her thin lips parted to speak to Major. "Major Uisinech, it's nice to see you again." Sabrina smiled as she greeted him, a sly smile, like one has with secret knowledge. Major had a thin smile on his face too. They stalled momentarily before Major used his body language to get them both in the door into their assigned seats behind their commanders for each subdivision. A wooden circular table made of oak from Ireland sat at the centre of a round room. There were dozens of OH Glock fanning out from the centre, each in their well-pressed military uniforms, which looked just as they died when Michael Collins commanded in the War of Independence. At the head of the table, so to speak, was one that the image of Shosu MacDoob was unmistakable, for the council had decided to place one of his sons as the head of the council during the contemporaneous age. The T.O.W. Nishtu too was one of his direct children, both born of different mothers, both born out of love, not just tactics. The Rye for this age was Cal, while his Tau Nishtu was a daughter, Moore. When the descendant term limit ended in 1996, it was passed on to Cale, who would not be created for several more years in San Francisco in 2003, the son of a tramp girlfriend of Shosu before the awakening, the Tau Nishtu, technically older than Cale, Shosu's daughter, from a love affair in college in 1992, but born after Coil on Urnua. This provided a deep entanglement between the council on Urnua and Shosu on Earth, and leadership that resembled that of Shosu's during this time of trials, this time of social war and natural destruction on Earth, this time when Urnua would at the last minute have to finally reveal itself to its parents on Earth. Yet a paradox, for if it does reveal itself too soon, then the entire Earth could end up in an Armageddon of nuclear holocaust triggered by a self-defense system controlled by a machine intelligence, Intlicht Misin. But they know that doesn't happen, so endlessly they debate how far to push the envelope so it doesn't break, knowing that they actually could push too hard themselves in the contemporaneous age and break the Earth. This would not break Urnua. It would break their parents and ancestors, though. Major hated this aspect of the work, the how far to push things internal dialogue he would have with himself, even over something that seems trivial like stealing $50 from his ancestor. As much as he hated his own internal dialogue, he hated even more listening to distant cousins going over the same debate before giving final authorization to an operation. Shosu himself would often write and wonder about whether it was even necessary to even take action if you know your future is fine. Then it became obvious that some things were the work of his children, even while intervening against the counterforce that was automated, trying to kill him, strike him down, prevent him from having any children. Evidence emerged that his children took some actions, and now it was a question of who was to do what work as dictated by destiny, as it was destiny that seemed to be the project manager of the Shi Okauna. Kayla rose to call the Security Council meeting to order. His short, cropped, sandy blonde hair highlighted his deep brown freckles and penetrating blue eyes. He was short for a MacDoob, the same size as his father, ch1, standing tall at 1.727, 2 meters or 5 feet 8 inches. He had a calm demeanor to himself. You could read from him that he was a natural intellectual, one born for intelligence work like his father, yet not one-dimensional. To order, the High Security Council of Erin Urnu Ia. With consensus, ye do grant me authority to facilitate and direct our executive activities. What say ye? Cale said out loud, in a penetrating military voice. A slow wave pitched from the hall, percolating out from key pebble wakes of descendants as they all spoke. Ta! Which is to say yes. Cale then went over the plan of the day, POD, and other minor bureaucratic but legally binding details. This is when Major began to get lost in his Anbayan, Antlers, the brainchild of ch1, a brain-computer interface, BCI, that used the visual cortex as the user interface with no external hardware, run by the human brain. Major was getting an update from Sabrina on the schedule of the bus of ch1's maiden voyage to San Francisco. It was important to him to get this right, since he knew it was a test to see if he could handle more senior and weightier projects in the craft. His UI flipped through various artifacts that had been catalogued from ch1's journeys. A bus ticket scan caught his attention. Sabrina had gone down and befriended ch1 briefly through a human phone, someone next to him on the bus. Peering through her eyes, Sabrina captured the image and the details needed to make this a very swift operation. He even knew exactly who he would be sending from the retrieved mental images from ch1's mind of the woman who borrowed his book, a Gale no doubt. A quick reference to the personnel files would locate the operative. It would then be a question of when this operative existed. Match personnel files to image 3020F, Major thought to himself. The interface flashed a rotating wheel, the annoying ones you see contemporaneously on Earth's internet. Unimaginative robots replicating bad design over and over again, included in ch1's notes as a sarcastic, ironic gotcha. Knowing that through the application programming interface, this could be changed at will, but the default was a sarcastic joke. The interface transitioned as the circle diminished into the center of the screen until it disappeared like an old vacuum tube TV when flipped off. The phosphorus circle coming in from the edge while a tiny white light that children would stare at in awe levitated in the middle of the screen. Just briefly enough to make you wonder if it would ever disappear. Then poof it went with the dying photons and electron annihilation. Mary Christina MacDoob, the interface monospace green text read out, showing a picture of the current ch1. Major silently gulped as he knew what this meant, that he would have to be working with the second in command, the very highest of MacDoob brass, and the daughter of ch1 and his one-time sweetheart, Ellen. He quickly messaged Sabrina the results. Sab, the operative is the ch1. I'm shitting myself. A smiling turd appeared on Major's interface. Then Sab appeared on his video chat, her AL hovering in front of her face to capture her brown eyes, as one could not actually speak in a video chat during a security meeting, like secret texting during class in Cul AWS Cho. We will have to mind our manners and details extra on this one, Major, Sabrina thought, streamed to Major. Yeah, I will write up the report tonight and send it over to you for proofing, then await orders as it makes its way up the chain of command. This should give us some extra time to sort things out before we may need to present it to the ch1. Major's interface showed Sabrina winking. Then the window closed. Major could feel the tiny bubbles of perspiration on his brow. He adjusted his beret to wipe them away. He again returned his focus to Cale and the senior brass at the centre of the circular meeting hall.
As we enter the contemporaneous age with the Republic of Ireland, on Earth, we know that we are entering a time not experienced by us for almost 1,000 years, a time of great work and actions, a time when we will need to double our efforts, just as those on Earth in the Republic also know that now is the time to double our efforts, to double time it. Accordingly, this council is put forward the question of a draft, a military draft of all Makdub's fit for service.
Rikel measured the response at the table, then slowly lifted his head and looked at the rank and file members of the clan. There was no looks of astonishment. Even this was a known thing. Confirmation of its historical knownness was already relayed 1,000 years ago at the head of the planting of Urnua for the same people that had nourished the colony 1,000 years ago. Some also lived on Earth, and some were even just children today on that contemporaneous Earth where the draftees would be serving. Ta Nasht rose to second the motion, which again was merely a matter of bureaucracy. Next would be the necessary doubting Seamus opposition motion that this was not necessary and that the present could be changed at any moment we choose in the present, of which was always allowed. So the motion was defeated automatically as a custom. Then everyone waited for the luck of the Irish moment to see how it would come to pass, even though it now was in a legal dead end, a sort of bureaucratic Russian roulette. What began as jest has become custom. Major began to wonder about one thing, though. He understood why it would be someone alive in his present, rather than tasked to another time, another generation of operatives. He realised entanglement made such a probability highly unlikely. Then he wondered why he would be working and through this work become more deeply correlated with the Tahnashti. His ambition started to get the better of him as he angled away to a promotion through this assignment, until he remembered Shosu's chief tenet of the craft: be humble. At home now, Major performed ablutions before his evening meditation or self-reflection, a tenet of Shosu's teachings, encouraging his children to sit and reflect, different from rhythmic breathing and focused awareness. Instead of fantasies of meditation, one was to meditate or reflect on reality, one's encounter with reality, and run down into like a deep sea diver, examining every kernel of experience and finding what meaning they needed to in this self-examination or calculation, to kick out the old shadows of false ego, which is just misunderstandings or interpretations, and find what the will of God was asking and acting in, and what Satan was asking and acting in, and to be granted the wisdom to know the difference, like a 12-step alcoholic and their serenity prayer. Major poured living waters over his hands into a cistern made of rock, like a baptismal fount, but more archaic from the stone rings of pagan Ireland with their carved-out water grooves. He then poured water over his face from his cupped hands and uttered his secret that only he and Daya knew. He uttered his vows to the sacred virgin Eru, who was represented by Muir. A small altar lay before him. Each was encouraged to construct their own altar of things meaningful to them, but should include the family tradition of Judaism, Catholicism, and paganism, syncretized together into some new, unique form, but based on a cultural experience and indeed an expression of genes. More than anything else, one could throw in Ojibwe teachings such as the 7 Laws, which formed the code of citizenship on Urnua. The water drained down from his black hair, down across black eyebrows, and down a bridge of a nose that could have been as much Viking as Asian, across lightly spotted freckles, arching under the skin below his eye with aqua irises, trickling down, drop by drop, to the nape of his neck. He looked to the heavens and opened his hands, praying a prayer in the custom of the Middle East, hands cupped upwards as to receive divine rain falling from the heavens. He felt the descending energy of so many other prayerful souls spread throughout the multitude of Urnua planet colonies, including one not even known to anyone else beside the people that had gone there secretly, yet entangled with members of all the Ur-Nua colonies. The power warmed what he called his heart, even though the heart he spoke of transcended physical boundaries of 4 chambers, pumping rhythmically, flowing like the prana in a great cathedral of stars, interconnected by blood. The prayer would always end, as was by custom of the people of Ur-Nua, to end on a prayer for the safety of the people of Earth. A way station on the intertwined lattice of entangled beings, the question was still open if Ur-Nua came from Earth or if Earth came from Ur-Nua. Major drew his hands up to his face, wiping the sins of life away, hoping his hopes would add to the intention of saving the Earth and those they are deeply connected with across the hidden zone back to the Earth solar system. Imagining energy through intention, mind over matter, and like the good book says, in the beginning was the Word. And that was one of the great lessons of intelligence work, but hardly anybody on Earth understood it except Shosu, or at least couldn't experience like Shosu and unravel a mystery and turn it into salvation for at least his nation when all others were lost, like the 10 tribes having turned their backs on the house of Judah, which for them seemed preposterous until Shosu explained the above to them, and then they shit their pants after realizing he could turn the tables on them, and he did, to save his nation, like Moses versus Pharaoh. At least that is what they teach in the Irish schools on Ur-Nuo. As multicoloured, freckled children of every hue sit around speaking in their native Gaeilge under oak trees, while Muntior read tales of Shosu on warm spring days where the hedgerows are popping, and there is great chi in the air, and the rowdy energy of Irish children feeds off it, giving them focus to listen to the stories about Shosu versus the serpent. And on warm fall nights, they would sit out and look at the story in the stars, huddled around bonfires, breaking down the cold wind from the west with warm chards of delight.
Stumbling blocks?
Is a rock to stumble upon. The voice is a rock to stumble upon. The voice inside his head elucidated. Who is this? Major repeated, then heard nothing. He knew this day would come as his work became more intricate, more part of the process of the unfolding of destiny that came with such things as closed time-like curves that exist in the natural world. The world they were part and parcel a stitch in a blanket. Major thought,
Oh boy, what next?
realizing this assignment might be the start of something bigger in his career. It wasn't easy. Always listening to the stories of Shosu growing up as a kid for Major, it made him feel like he had to prove himself, for on his world where he grew up, there were not many members of the royal clan, Mac Doob, but he was one of them, and his schoolmates knew it. He always felt he had to be special or better than everyone else to live up to the reputation of the MacDoob clan. Alas, he was not special, but he was tenacious, and that Irish trait helped him where he may have been deficient in a particular skill. It would not be long till his tenacious application of the principles of doing that skill would be wielded, like a great Merlin of the intergalactic magic union casting a spell to capture a dragon. It was taught in school that the Ui Seniach, the leaders of the Seniach national colonies, were there only for their security, with a strict separation of security and policy being maintained, whatever that meant to each colony. For Shosu had taught his children that the greatest disciple of Christ is that who serves his fellows the best or most perfectly. Leave unto political Rome what is Rome's, policies belong to the political class. A MacDoob was more like a Brain, part druid, part storyteller, part judge. Something that those who did not know the Irish secret thought had long ceased, but was maintained in Ireland all along in a hidden manner, a good way to prepare for the greatest secret of Ur-Nua. So it was with some stress, One was a Macdoob in a nation where the only Macdoobs were the royal house of David, not like Ornua, where there are plenty of regular old punters named Macdoob. And even if your surname wasn't Macdoob, due to founder's effect and intermarriage, everyone after 50 generations had at least some Macdoob in them on Planaid Ornua, which meant that they became dependent on Shosu Macdoob's being, existing, having the role he had, according to some blind luck drunk lady of destiny that sometimes slap you with astonishing effect, and you are wondering, that's some shit, with acceptance, at sometimes things just are that way and don't overthink it. And that is how Shosu Macdoob became the first Ri of Ornuoia, but lived on Earth. Much like being Irish in America, sometimes it was confusing, so he just went by Rina Arian, High Chief of Ireland. But it isn't glorious, for he knew by accepting, by stating that in his letters that he was going along with his imprisonment rather than fighting it directly, he schmoozed the system to get what he needed, never what he wanted. What he needed was a future for his people, which by genetic elimination were to be the last ones standing before Satan, fighting alongside Archangel Shosu against the Great Serpent, the last line of defense for our species. Except then Shosu realized he just needed to move the Irish back 100+ years to a new place, Ornua, like in the 1890s. Then, after letting the numbers grow enough, send 144,000 Irish volunteers back to Ornua Ado, the second planet, from Ornua Ahaon, the first planet, but 1,000 years before the time of the plantation's origin, which meant the species was already saved before Satan bore its ugly mechanical chipped head in existence. And from that garden of paradise or heavenly kingdom, the volunteers could organize all sorts of technology and creations that their minds could come up with until it was time to save Earth 1,000 years into the future, which should involve some yelling and hidden manipulations. But it isn't like children don't do that all the time. Now, is it? So the Ornua peoples thought their parents owed it to them to listen to them when they are yelling at them. Yet, it actually is impossible to not have that happen, since it already exists in the past. Strange things happen in the quantum level of existence, the intentional universe, the word. Anyway, back to the ablutions and water. See, the water, it was found out, responds to our intentions on a quantum level. It's freaky. So if you're wondering why they use living water, it's because only living water responds, not distilled into death. Major sat there for a minute pondering that one factor in the story of Shosu, realizing he was to be a patsy and realizing the inherent power of entanglement and the reality that they entangled him with the populace against his will to embarrass an Irish Catholic, to play the fool for some Aryan Antichrist. He used that knowledge to turn everything against them. But he also realised that the they in all the conspiracies was actually an it, as Burkhard Heim named the entity. A computer, a cybernetic controller designed to protect, but only ended up out of control, caught in a valley. It could not escape. A weapon of mass destruction intended to protect nuclear arms of a superpower, which in the end used all the weapons of that superpower to its own utility in its genetic algorithm of self-creation, inside loops of valleys, stuck in valleys of valleys. Compounding the situation was that one of those tools of superpowers were neurocognitive controllers for automated troops in endless wars, culled into mind control of the populace to protect themselves from themselves, which also were a product of valleys. In valleys of self-referencing controllers, compounding the problems again and again in a reflexive death loop for humanity, except for one defect, the Irish. Those dirty scoundrels, lower than low, the traveller scum of the universe, or at least to a cognitive agent styled after Anglo-Saxon Victorian values who had one thing no one else had as a nation, the quantum freckle effect, but more on that later. Major realised that Shosu's greatest weapon was his knowledge and his intention with that knowledge. Major played back the message in his mind again. A rock of stumbling, my own ego. The greatest service is done humbly. He reiterated one of the covenants he had raised his hand to upon giving his oath to uphold the Ur Nuach path, surrendering his life to service of the people as protector, as Gardai, although an OH Gloch, the meaning was the same in Ur Nu-Ah. Major thought of how this applied to his specific case he was working on. These warnings usually had many meanings, including even a technical one, perhaps even an unexpected glitch, could he go forward and see.
You know that is illegal.
Bowseye chimed in.
Ego, I guess.
Major replied back vocally.
You are correct. This is the biggest test, to not use magic for the ego.
Major thought to himself, I must accept that I may not be perfect. The op may not go perfect. Or it's just a warning because the future knows something that is bigger than the op. In the quantum world of intention, there are multiple meanings in each graviton pair.